I'm very thankful that Dorian Cavé decided to join Affectively again to have a conversation about what he's been up to and his learnings and research. We had this conversation at the end of November 2024, and it was a challenging time, I think, for me. So this conversation took a very reflective and personal note, especially before we started recording. We almost thought maybe, I was not in a good space to have that conversation. My baby was 4 months old, and I was still recovering in a way. Well, I guess not sure if you ever recover from labor and having a baby and the US elections and wondering, having brought a kid into this world and what's going down at the moment. And Dorian was so kind and helped me ground, and then he also said, if I am allowed to share, Dorian, I hope it's okay, that from your perspective, or let's say the bubble area that you come from, you think of people that have children as people that have hope in the future. And that's something that I took with me and that resonates. And I guess I'm in the hope that I am hopeful, that I hope that I do what I can in these challenging moments. And I just wanted to share this because this is something that was very helpful for me at the moment. And that Dorian, his generosity he gave to me and helped me be able to jump into this conversation. So just wanted to acknowledge and share these. And as in the previous time, or every time I talked to Dorian, I learned loads. We started with an update of the Deep Adaptation Forum, Diversity and Decolonising Circle, that you will hear about. Very interesting. So stay on for more. And then we dived into his research specifically on the social learning spaces. He talks about the 4 conditions so that people can stay in uncomfortable spaces. Why would we want to be in an uncomfortable space? He shared a quote I hadn't heard, and it just blew my mind, that culture is not our friend, a quote by Terence McKenna. And I think it just captures the essence of so much of what we're doing and learning our ways and why. And Dorian talks about how we can create those spaces to unlearn our culture and the invitation to stay uncomfortable. And I'm very thankful that he also shared how to do it a bit more lightly. So how to take on roles. He talks a little bit about that. I'm very thankful. That's a reminder that I always need. How do we do this work? With some lightness, with some playfulness, because it is hard and it doesn't get any easier by just bringing the heaviness in. On the contrary, I think that playfulness and humor are part of what is more needed of in these spaces. And then we talk about the big topic of value creation. So a very rich conversation. I would even would like to have a third part with Dorian. Maybe it will happen, but let's focus on this one. I hope you enjoy it and learn as much as I did. Welcome to this new episode of Affectively. And for this one, we have a former guest, Dorian Cavé, who's with us today. And last time he was here together with Wendy Freeman, like his co-researcher for a part of his PhD research. And Wendy, unfortunately, couldn't join us today, but definitely a wave for her from here. And maybe we engage in a conversation in the YouTube notes, or we're happy for Wendy to bring in any
of her inputs afterwards as well. So thank you, Dorian, for being with me here today as well.
Well, hi, thank you so much for inviting me again, Alicía. It's a pleasure to be here.
And just as a reminder that Dorian, well, he was, let's say, writing or finishing his PhD the first time I interviewed him almost a year ago, and he's happily gotten to that goal, let's say, and it worked well. So congratulations on that. And your PhD is in the area of sociology and educational studies. And currently, Dorian is an associate researcher with the Weizenbaum Institute for the Network Society. So in Berlin, we might chat about that as well. And so they focus, or you focus in your work there on the interface between networks and social change, which is part of the research that you have been doing, as I understand it. Yes. So yeah, thanks again for being with us. And let's see where we flow. My, let's say, plan idea would be today to focus a bit more, let's say, on the maybe theoretical part of things, or to bring in a bit more of the theory that you used for your research, for your PhD. And that the last time we talked, I think I had a lot of takeaways from the Diversity and Decolonising Circle, from the Deep Adaptation Forum. And I think we talked about a lot of specifics. And interestingly, since then, we also had a podcast with a colleague of mine, Ria Beck, on circle practice. So yeah, let's see. I think we're fine. If we go theoretical, we do that. And if we get more practical, that's also okay.
Perfect.
And my first question to you would be, well, it's been almost a year since we talked, and there were, or well, actually, maybe let me do a recap of what is it that we talked about before getting into the conversation, so we refresh our memories. So we talked about the Deep Adaptation Forum and this Diversity and Decolonising Circle, and I remember that you had this sort of like two goals, or a first goal at the beginning that was like, oh, let's all have this training on decolonizing and diversity, and that then this evolved into a sort of mutual support group. And that's what we talked more about. And this, let's say, tension with wanting people to visit the training on such a, it's not even delicate, it's like super deep and challenging topic that challenges our identities, our societies, etc. And so yeah, this deconstruction of the self, I think we talked quite a bit about that last time, and especially about, and let's say that's the part that I was asking for, like the role of emotions in this deconstruction, in this learning, in getting further together. And for example, you mentioned in the other chat this very clear example of the IPCC reports that the data has been there for decades, so it's nothing new. And without the emotional involvement, it's, yeah, we have seen it's really not possible to make an advancement in these topics, or not as significant enough or wanted. Yeah, can support us in what is needed. So yeah, we did talk a bit about that. And then of course the challenges that we live in this culture of separation, the hierarchies of race, gender, the separation from nature, and all that, creating this sort of like lack of empathy. And then through this, let's say, relational embodiment, then being able to get into this sort of empathy that mobilizes, right? So I think that was also one of the takeaways from the circle, that it's actually not only about feeling or just about being together, getting to know yourself better, but actually getting to, it's my responsibility. So it was this thing of, your problem is my problem as well. And so I want to mobilize from there. Yeah, so I think that, and then we had this very nice, how to say, let's say metaphor, or let's say parallel that you brought in about peeling onions. That was from another researcher that unfortunately I forget the name of.
Vanessa Andriotti.
Thank you for bringing that in. Exactly, and how that's the actual type of learning that we need in our current age, and that's, let's say, the one that is coherent with decolonization, and when we don't want to be into those hierarchies. So it's like going layers deeper and deeper. So yeah, those are, let's say, some of the things that stood out from that conversation. And
Thanks a
from
lot.
there, yeah, thank you. And then from there, my question was, are there like any, let's say, new learnings or anything that you think relevant? Maybe there's nothing that you think, that's nothing relevant to share, but anything relevant to share from what happened with the circle, any learnings that you had, let's say, in the past year, more or less?
It's so what feels like an important learning that has emerged for me and perhaps for us in the circle has been around also, well, both celebrating and appreciating the relationships that have been woven within this small group, but also learning to acknowledge when the container has served its purpose and is no longer necessary. So I think a couple of months or a few months after we last spoke, the D&D circle decided to dissolve as a container for our conversations. And that was it came after a few months of many discussions in which we were searching for ways for the circle to remain relevant as part of its the wider network it was encompassed within, so the Deep Adaptation Forum. And we could sense, or at least I could sense, that much of the energy and the drive that was with us for most of the 3 years of its existence had diminished, and therefore that the circle itself had become less life-giving and attractive, or I'm searching for the right word, or there was something that was less appealing for us to engage in it, and perhaps it's impossible to know exactly what that was, but it was just how it moved into another phase. And so collectively we decided to close that period of time, and collectively we also wrote a little text explaining how we came to that conclusion, and giving thanks to one another and to people who had been supporting this work. And so it was done quite peacefully, I believe, and it felt like an important acknowledgement that although in our culture we are always encouraged to be focusing only on what is growing and what is flourishing, things cannot be growing and flourishing forever, basically. And that learning to compost initiatives, groups, desires, intentions is also essential, and perhaps it's something that is not widely practiced, and that we tend to equate this with death in our culture on some kind of subliminal level, and therefore to feel this aversion. So I'm happy that we didn't try to hang on to this container or this group and make it work. We have to make it work. yeah, it's just it worked, and then it worked less well, and so we just moved on to something else. But the relationships remain. So this feels like something important from the time of our last conversation. Yeah, that's one thing at least that's with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. What I'm wondering here, and I'll put it on the show notes. The other thing I will put it on the show notes, because I forgot to say at the beginning, is that Dorian has a great website containing his thesis, so which makes it much more available for anyone interested in accessing the research. So we'll put that available for anyone wanting to check some of the learnings that we'll go through today. And the other thing I will put in the show notes is a session that we did. Well, it's more in the context of course that we do called Thriving Networks, and we did a session with Sophie Banks on composting networks when it's time.
Wow.
And yeah, it was super interesting. And I've been in, let's say, one main composting process that has been on for 3 years and has not finished yet. And then like others are smaller initiatives. And I remember both of them being very, very painful. And what I'm curious about is, like, let's say, since this was an initiative in which you were already having super hard discussions and conversations and being confronted with many things. So I'm wondering, like, how that ground, let's say, influenced the process of composting. So of course we would need to get into a lot of details to be able to compare, etc. But I don't know if there's something about that layer that you could share with us.
Wow. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. So it may be that because we came to, I mean, a very important part of the practice of being in the circle for myself, and I believe for my fellow participants, was around learning to sit with discomfort, to sit in the fire, as to use the sentence that was often put forth. Because, as you mentioned, we were dealing with very difficult and painful topics around how each of us, to a larger, smaller extent, we've been indoctrinated to live within a violent culture, a violent system, or at least a system that perpetuates historical violence and systemic harm. And to realize how each of us was contributing to this, to those forms of harm, be it through how patriarchy or racism or ableism or whatever it is, all those different forms of oppression are alive in our social fabric, the social fabric that we're part of. So it could be that we've been training ourselves almost to develop this form of capacity to not run away from discomfort, but try to face it. And similarly, another form of tension or pain that we have been grappling with in the circle has been that of conflict, and it has been a source of deep learning and unlearning for many of us, following according to the testimonies that we've shared with one another. So it could be that because our participation in the circle was not always consistently a sort of everything is fine, and we're just having fun, or like being just lovey-dovey with one another, although we had many of those moments too. But it was, we had this impression, or this we became accustomed to dealing with difficult stuff. It may have helped us with the adopting this common resolution to close down the period of our circle's activity. But that's just my intuition. I'd be curious to hear more from my fellow participants on this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just, let's say, a guess from my side, by knowing that the one process in which it was not a group, it was like, let's say, a whole network. The biggest part of the 3 years was spent in, let's say, trying to make people understand that, maybe time has come, and this was a very exhausting process, right? So then very little to no energy was left for the real composting, and now it's just a very small group of people working on that, and how we share the knowledge and all of it. And I think that a part is, that it was not a place where we were used to this, let's say, sort of hard conversations, or that, or the other one, closing a group. I remember it is very like hard, like, say, the impact of someone saying, okay, we're done, and it's like, oof, okay, what does it mean? How do you process that? So that's why I was asking in curiosity to see. Yeah.
What comes to me listening to you is how what can make it so difficult to leave a group is when you find a deep sense of belonging to it. Right, so it becomes part of your identity, and it makes the connections within it all the more precious. And so maybe there are some ways to maybe after a while, or in certain situations, the sense of belonging can exceed the boundaries of the particular group or network. And so composting that group or network doesn't mean that you lose your belonging, or perhaps you lose part of it. But for example, with the D&D circle, I still feel a deep sense of belonging with the other people, or both with the people who have been in the circle, and other people I've met around it, who are also intent on exploring and acting on those topics of systemic oppression. And so it's still something which is deeply part of me, and enables me to have this sense of connection, even though the group itself has ceased to exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, keeping, let's say, the relationships that nurture that belonging. And then let's say, talking about relationships. So I was curious. Let's say we didn't have time the first time we chatted, because everything you shared was already so interesting. But I wanted to at least ask you this time. So in your thesis, you talk about social learning spaces. So there we go, with the relationships, and what role do they have in the whole learning process. So I wanted to ask you if you could, let's say, describe for us, or just share what are social learning spaces, and then if you can tap a little bit into this distinction between communities of practice, or where they're intersect. And don't worry about being super specific, because your thesis is on the website. So if anyone wants to check this beautiful comparison table that you have, it's on the website, so people can share it there. But if you could give us a glimpse of that.
Thanks. So what I understand as social learning spaces, following the theory that has been developed by Etienne and Beverly Wenger-Trainer, are a social learning space is a relational space in which people bring their curiosity towards a certain topic as they try to make a difference in the world. So they always stay at the edge of their knowing. They don't come to that space having all the answers and telling other people what's right and what should be happening, but really out of a sense of deep wishing to know more and to explore with the other people. And the third characteristic is that they pay attention to feedback that that comes from the conversations or the actions happening in that space. So actually, the conversation that you and I are having right now is a social learning space, I believe, because I believe that both of us come in with a certain curiosity towards the topics that you're exploring with your podcast. And we are, at least I know that I feel this sense of I feel eager to hear your take on those things and to have this this conversation unfold and bring us to places that I would not suspect. And as I engage myself and my experience in this conversation, I want to both listen to what is happening with you. I mean, in how you receive the things I say, and also what other people might think and feel listening to this podcast. So yeah, social learning space can be something very, very fluid and even very temporary. And it's yeah, what I sense is one of its key characteristics is a sense of aliveness and presence around particular topics of interest. Whereas what I understand as a community of practice, so this is another notion that has been developed by Etienne Beverly Wenger Trainer, but from earlier works, is something that is slightly more established as a group of people who share a sensation of being members of this group and of having a common domain of interest, and through their interactions and their exploration of this domain also have a repertoire of skills and history, documents, rules, codes, stories, what have you. So when you belong to a community of practice, for example, that could be when you're, when you get together with your close family members. That could be a community of practice, the people you grew up with. You have common reference points in the history of the family, how the house was built, where people lived and where they moved, and maybe you have a certain vocabulary that you share. It's basically a whole history of relationships that connects all of you together. And of course, communities of practice are everywhere. They are at work, for example, if you work in a big company, it could be in the department that you've worked for many years. Something you have perhaps a jargon. You can tell your colleague, oh well, you can check this with so and so because they will know best. You have this kind of map of what people know about how to do certain things within this particular department, and who is a member, who knows and who doesn't know, who might be on more in the periphery. So one of the main characteristics of a community of practice is that there is this shared repertoire of practice. Yeah, it's only when people have the experience of connecting with the others in this community that they can actually make sense of what people are talking about and what's happening there. So it's something that's a bit more, that takes a longer time to grow and to form, I believe, than a social learning space. That is something, a social learning space can happen just with two people having a conversation in, in a train or wherever, and so what I find interesting about the Diversity and Decolonising Circle, going back to it, is that I do believe that we became a community of practice through our shared experience and vocabulary, topics of interest, etc. But at the same time, we also challenged ourselves not to fall asleep in this practice, in this shared set of perspectives and intentions through certain occasions that we gave ourselves. For example, when we started to introduce the practice of hotspots in our calls. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. Maybe we mentioned it last time.
I don't remember it. If you could explain it, that would be great. Yes.
Well, so the way we used it, I believe it comes from a deeper tradition, but how we used it is it comes from process work. That's it. At the start of each call, we would open up space for people to voice any difficult feelings they may have with regards to each other, to whatever was said in the previous call, to things that are more difficult to bring up when we just want to be friends and to be having a nice meeting. Because we discovered that this really opened up space for us to collectively make sense of what was happening in each of us. And so instead of going straight into business and then say, okay, how about this workshop, that text that we're writing together, and then just go through the hour together, we would actually wake each other up to certain aspects that would otherwise not be paid much attention to. And from a more practical or instrumental mindset, you could also say that opening up such moments prevents big conflicts from happening in a group, because you have more occasions to actually act and pay attention to small things that may come up here and there, and to take care of one another without having to wait until something huge explodes and then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, but this was not the check. It was like additional to the check-in.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It was a very distinct phase in the meeting. Yeah, and sometimes we just had nothing to say and we just moved on. But,
but let's say that at every meeting you have the chance of that you might miss one, but you can always have the possibility of bringing something.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I have seen that in your thesis you actually ask the question as well, like, could it be that the circle, so the Diversity and Decolonising Circle, being both a social learning space and a community of practice, that it, let's say, allowed for more, the exact question is like greater innovative capability than if it were only the one or the other. So I understand that this is what you were talking about, that is, well, we have this regularity, we have this joint history, and at the same time there's this thing of wanting to go a bit to the edge to things. And what I remember from our last conversation that you were saying was this point where we ended about responsibility. that about at the end of the day is like, okay, what do we actually do with this? So it's sort of like never getting comfortable. That's the feeling I get when I hear you, like always inquiring.
Yeah. I believe that. Yeah, that's at least the working theory. Obviously, we can't compare, and we can't compare the D&D circle to any other collective, or we don't have access to a parallel dimension where we could check how it would be. But it's my sense that if we get too comfortable with our practice, then it can be more difficult to absorb new ideas or to change the way we operate in a group, because we've always done things in that way, and so that's just how it is. So if newcomers arrive, for example, they may have a hard time to influence the direction of a group, and there's not much social learning really happening, because it's more preserving the existing regime of competence. So we become competent in that group when we know how to do this, and we know, we have that knowledge about the history, about the whatever topics that we're discussing, and anyone who comes in has to acquire that stuff, right? So it's like they have to absorb all of that stuff, and then they can become competent. But if there's more spaces for to stay at the edge of our knowing, then so to open up social learning spaces within the community of practice, then my sense is that it should allow for at least a bit more, a little less rigidity in how the group is and considers itself, I guess.
It's very interesting. I think I'm starting to see more the nuances of the two, and I'm thinking about something that sometimes are greater than. I mean, let's say it's a bit different. It's like it's not a community, it's a collective. Like that's a whole new level or different level of identity, probably, and depth in different areas. But there's something we call high context and low context. And so you have people that have been around for a while, and they know the rules of the game, the written ones, the non-written ones, and then how challenging it is sometimes for, let's say, high context people to want to be involved with low context people, because you have to explain things. And of course, like they say something and it's like, we've had this conversation like 50 times. Well, it's part of community work, right? Repeating, and building the connective tissue. But I understand that in this case, for example, there would be spaces in which maybe we go more into this, I don't know, like peeling onions, or like more into the edge of a topic, and then it's built, I'm just guessing here, but it's built on this personal experience or personal challenges and things like this, and that everyone can contribute, and everyone can go to the edge of their own learning and the learning of the group through that. So yeah,
exactly. It's it's like people cooking together in a kitchen, and then suddenly someone starts peeling and cutting lots of onions in the middle of everyone, and so everyone is kind of having to deal with that. Definitely, or at least opening up moments when even the people with high context can be invited to see from a different perspective what they have been doing so far, and consider radically different ways of being in the collective, and the rules of the game that you mentioned maybe could be made visible by people who just arrived, and then people suddenly gain the chance to think, well, it's true. We've always had this tacit rule that we would never talk about this or never do this or that, but what if we tried?
That's, well, definitely, like the exposing the implicit things that you don't realize anymore that they were implicit. That's per se already very valuable. But I'm also thinking, let's say this, you mentioned the sentence, preserving the regime of competence. So let's say that this social learning is a way in itself which let's say makes a lot of sense for the context that you applied it in the Diversity and Decolonising Circle, sort of like challenging the power dynamics in a constant way, we could say, and mixing things up continuously and being in this discomfort way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm thinking about is, well, I've worked through the years with, let's say, several organizations that, we have this concept of communities of practice, which is great. It has been more or less taken up, or it has been, I don't know how to say it, spread as a sort of concept and as a practice. And that often so what I'm relating it now is to the topic we started with composting. So like, what is actually the goal of that community of practice, and is the energy pulling enough? Like sometimes I see a lot of effort of people trying to build it up, and then it's challenging in a way to maintain it. I mean, communities of practice take a lot of work, and there is often what I have seen, this thing of like, we don't want, it's just for the managers, or it's just for a certain type of people with a certain type of knowledge. And how difficult it is to mix or make this. Let's say, in our case, we work in self-organizing, so there's a sort of like this cowardicity, there's more openness, it's by principle, people take in a different way. But let's say you do this in an NGO, let's imagine, where there's a lot more of rigidity around it, and how maybe a concept as a social learning space. So I'm just wondering here, it's like, how can that, shake things up a little bit and be more inviting and yeah. So I don't know, these are the things that are coming as I'm listening to, is like, how interesting would it be to say like, community of practice, because that's what we know, but what about adding this additional element, this spice?
Yeah, definitely. What's interesting with a social learning space, I find, is that I think that conditions can be created for it to emerge, but it only emerges through the energy and the appetite of people who are in it. It's if you cannot make it happen for other people, I think. But for example, it's just like, the proverbial conversations around the water cooler, right? That tend to come up a lot in organizational studies. The researchers have found out that there's actually a lot of really important stuff happens around the coffee machine or the water cooler. So if you don't have a water cooler or a coffee machine that people can gather around, then you lose a lot of important occasions for such social learning spaces, for example, to happen spontaneously. So I think any organization can, if it doesn't want to, or if it wants to stimulate the emergence of such relational spaces, could just consider, well, what more can we do that just enables spontaneous chance encounters to emerge between people who usually don't really have this so many occasions like that. And but it's really an alchemy that is dependent on the agency and the desire of people themselves, really.
Yeah, which, I mean, you're answering the question, but still, I'll ask you if there are any, let's say, design elements that, of course, this is completely emergent, as you were saying. So, but is there anything we can build in the container to say, okay, we increase the chances that we try to enable it, as you mentioned, and it might happen or it might not happen, to say, we have a community of practice, or we don't, like, any design elements that you could think of for a social learning space?
Yeah. Well, so if I think of again, staying with the example of the D&D circle, but which reminds me of other examples of other groups that I've been part of. I find that not constraining ourselves to having a lot of business items to imperatively take care of every time we got into a meeting, for example, but allowing ourselves to, for example, during a check-in, expressing some really difficult, painful emotion, and then taking perhaps the entire meeting to unpack what was happening with us, be it just one person or several, allowing for this really plentiful relational space and not seeing it as a distraction or losing time because we have stuff to do and we should absolutely be doing it, I find has been really precious, both for the sense of belonging, to be nurtured in our group, for this mutual care to emerge, but also occasions for unexpected insights to happen. So it's hard for me to consider design elements for social learning spaces specifically, apart from just making the time and space for them to emerge and be rich. And it's really about how you experience them as a person. If it feels flat and dull and repetitive, then it's probably not a social learning space you're in. It's probably just like something that, that you feel like you have to be there and, attend because it's been programmed in that way. So yeah, as long as there's energy, you leave the space with energy, then it's working. But perhaps something, as we're talking about design elements, something that I could mention, which is more on the level of entire communities, but which I suspect is also valid at the fractal level of groups within communities, is a set of 4 enabling conditions which have repeatedly come up in my research in the 2 online communities that I within which this research, my PhD research, was carried out. I don't say on because many people were an integral part of the research, such as Wendy that you mentioned in DAF. But so those 4 elements to me help to draw the outlines of conditions that help people to particularly stay with uncomfortable topics and denials that are spread within our culture and therefore can lead to deep social learning. The first one being how this community can foster a sense of belonging and mutual care in people, so that they really feel as much as possible a sense of psychological safety for them to be themselves, to be vulnerable, and therefore to venture into more difficult personal or interpersonal topics. The second is allowing space for transformative conflict, so not shying away from conflict and not trying to provoke conflict, but acknowledging that it's part of being a human being as a relational person, and that we are going to disagree sometimes, and it's not the end of the world. But how can we give ourselves some basic or sophisticated techniques to allow, acknowledge, and treat conflict as a source of collective learning that can both strengthen our bonds, our relationships, and lead to deeper collective wisdom, intelligence. And the third one, which is linked but not exactly the same, is fostering critical discernment within a community. So that is actually connecting with what we just discussed previously with social learning spaces and communities of practice, but it's allowing for people to question the very norms and acknowledged or used structures of the community that they are in. So not saying we have always done things this way and this is how it is, and not saying this is the one and single truth that that we start from, and we will, you know, always keep coming back to this truth and nothing can contradict it. Of course, a community will usually have a set of values which people rally around, which are essential, but really encouraging people to be reflexive around what they believe is right, and including on various forms of information or practices, etc., and allowing for people to disagree on this, including at the community level, feels really important. And the fourth element is that of distributed leadership. So even in a community which views itself as, especially in communities that view themselves as horizontal and egalitarian, anyone has a way to become a leader in a particular capacity or particular way. And it can sometimes happen that people are afraid of leadership because we can equate it with just having one person telling everyone what to do, you know, the proverbial charismatic figure. And I know that for me, for a long time, leadership was a word I didn't like to use because it reminded me of all that. But if you manage to empower people to step up in whatever skill, competence, roles, qualities, and those things can be shifting all the time, then a lot of interesting things can happen and creativity can emerge in the group. So there you go. Those four elements of care and belonging and conflict transformation, critical discernment, and distributed leadership feel like I don't know if maybe you could call them design elements, or at least principles to that I now use as a framework to consider the groups and communities I'm part of. And if one of them is lacking, then I wonder, well, how could we try to bring in a little more of that, or a little more of that, to so that things can be, you know, more interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those four. I think this is coming up for me. Let's say especially, I think, yeah, I think second one, I guess it's I mean, thinking about us greater than, or like, let's say my experience is like conflict, transformational conflict. That's a tricky one to work on, like lots of things to unlearn there. But I'm thinking about the, let's say the third one, fostering this critical discernment. So I'm wondering, let's say that the fourth one for us, like distributed leadership, that's what we're based about, or let's say it's also the focus of the podcast of saying, okay, so the context is self-organizing or collective organizing or distributed leadership. And then it's like, okay, so what is the role of emotions there, or how can it support self-organizing? And let's say that maybe the framing that I used to think about it, or what came up during the research I was doing within Greater Than, was this sort of division between being and doing. So being spaces and doing spaces. And maybe the doing is where you have more these sort of routines, ways of doing that are more or less explicit. And I think that a lot of it, we're realizing that, there's a lot that is implicit there that we didn't know. And then a colleague, And I remember I presented this as, you know, being versus doing, and everyone was like, but it's not a duality, and, you know, it's not a versus. And I'm like, well, you know, it's how you frame it in the interviews. Like, I didn't come up with it. But then the reaction was, like, how can there be more being in the doing? Or my colleague Elena keeps bringing that in. And that's a bit what I'm interpreting, or let's say taking from my context, from what you're sharing about, like, how can you, let's say, have this critical discernment and bring it in let's say, well, in my understanding, in a constructive way, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's even good to bring it in, even if we don't make it to bring it in as much as a constructive way as we would want. But this sort of, I don't know, what I'm feeling is that it's sort of like being awake in the processes and not letting be drawn by, that's how we've always done it, so that we can be more of a bit of a social learning space. That's that, you know, we're always awake, always alive, always in the moment with the emotion that comes up in that moment, or how I'm feeling, as a way of, as a part in your research where you also talk about different ways of knowing as well, and using that intuition to guide your contributions and actions, and how people engage with each other.
Yeah. One thing that is with me, just that comes up immediately, is I remember a set of meeting or roles that people can choose to take on in a meeting. Or there's also the famous different hats of Edward de Bono, right? Just thinking of you know, any proposal or discussion that's happening, and one of the roles or hats that can be taken by a person explicitly, and really just saying, okay, I'm going to put on this hat now, is that of, for example, the person who pays attention to boundaries or limitations, or what could go wrong, and to do this, not to discourage everyone to be doing this, or to be sabotaging whatever the topic of conversation is, but to really focus their awareness on this. So this is just a very basic, simple thing that can be practiced. And there are many different hats. There's the optimistic, also there's the visionary. I know that Starhawk has this whole really fascinating set of mythical animals that she associates with those different roles, right? So I think that the role I just mentioned is called the snake in her typology of it's in the empowerment manual. She mentions all those things. So anyways, the essence is that we can remind one another and to consciously orient our attention to certain things in even more playful ways, and it's almost like sharpen up our skills. So if I tend to be a really optimistic and always see the glass half full person, then sometimes it can be good for me to actually step into that position where I look at things from a slightly different angle. And then I think a second thing that is present is on a more theoretical, political level, perhaps, which is linked with the decolonizing aspect, is that if we start from the acknowledgement that culture is not our friend, as I think Terence McKenna put it, or someone like that, but that we are we are immersed in certain ways of being and doing and seeing the world from the time when we were born and grew up and were socialized into different groups, in such ways that we don't really realize it, where it's just the water that we're swimming in, then it becomes easier to be reminded to take a step back or to pay attention to certain ways in which we express ourselves or do things without becoming defensive immediately, or like see it as an attack on our personality or character. But of course, it's easy to say, that it's really easy to say, and then how to do it lovingly within a group, and to do it with care and humility, without one person putting themselves as on the higher moral ground, for example, and saying you're just being whatever, racist or sexist or blah blah blah, is extremely, it's an art. I think it's not something that can be just decided like that, but it's a very difficult and challenging practice. But yeah, I see it as being really instrumental for for people to be able to step out of their personal or collective patterns, and also to pay deeper attention to how some of those patterns can even emerge out of the wider informational context that we are steeped in as a society, right? So where do we get our information or news from? Who do we listen to? What political interests might be at play in transmitting certain framings about the world or about people. Anyways, all of those, this kind of critical literacy feels really essential.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing in the element of playful, because as you say this, I'm like, oh my God, how are we supposed to learn to organize ourselves in a different way, try to get ourselves paid through the work that we do, and then on top of that, like keep that challenge going on. I'm like, but then there are these ways, sometimes you get to being a bit playful with that, and of course with all the care and love that is necessary to really be able to do this properly. But that sometimes that I think, or that's definitely a tendency that I have, like everything's super serious, and then it's like it's very difficult from the heaviness to be able to move to these places with more we're learning together. And because time goes by way too fast, like I have 5 minutes, but still I will do it to ask you a little bit about value, because there's a lot of it in your thesis. And I mean, I don't feel, let's say that I have, the legitimacy to talk much about value, but it's something that, let's say our reference, and I have it here, that we take, let's say, our understanding of value from David Graeber. That would be, there is this process I'm going to write now, process or mechanism through which people assign meaning to their actions incorporated within a broader social whole. So I wanted to ask you here, like, how have you, let's say, built the link between learning, or this type of social learning, and value creation? And maybe what is because then in your thesis, it's very, I would encourage everyone to have a look at it, because it's really interesting. You have like all of these different types of, let me see if I find it myself. Yes. Let's say, well, it's cycles of social learning, and then what value is getting out of it, right? So let's say that, and you will be able to explain than I do. So we have a value creation cycle of immediate. So what has your experience been like? And so my actual question, like, what this whole process, like, do you think it would be valuable for other collectives to say, maybe we do a simple form of that, or like, what is the thing that we're, let's say, what's the value that we get from doing that? So different questions, but if you could give us a glimpse, just because I think it would be a pity to finish this conversation and not touch upon that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's um, this aspect of value creation is, in my view, it's a very important. It's an essential aspect of the theory of social learning that has been developed by Etienne and Bev Wenger-Trainer. I'm concerned that I might not do justice to it because it's very nuanced and well explained in their book called Learning to Make a Difference in 2020. But I can try to give my take on it. And I think the definition from David Graeber that you mentioned is quite close to the way in which this topic is treated in the theory. They have offered a sort of evaluation tool that enables anyone to look at the social learning spaces that they are part of and consider what is happening in those social learning spaces for me. So it's always from the perspective of the person, a person taking part in the social learning space together with anyone else. And just what is coming out from my involvement in this. So for example, if I take the social learning space that you and I are part of now, I can say that I feel like I'm drawing a lot of positive immediate value to start with, because my experience feels enlivening. I feel stimulated, and I can sense this this sense of curiosity and keenness to get into all of those really interesting topics and explorations of our respective experiences. I know that I'm also drawing potential value from it in the shape of new ideas and knowledge. For example, about what you shared from your experience in Greater Than Collective, which forms like a kind of potential value that I could then bring into further into other projects or reflections, writings I might do later on. So for example, tomorrow I might think back on our conversation and think, well, it reminds me of that other thing I read in that book, so maybe I'll go back to Alicía and ask her some more details about this, so this becomes then a form of applied value, because it's like I'm using that potential, I would be using that potential value to put it to use in a different context. And eventually this might create realized value for me if, for example, my purpose of having this conversation with you is about, let's say, deepening my knowledge of social learning and finding more innovative ways of inspiring people anywhere to create interesting change in the world. So let's say this is my kind of aspiration in having this conversation with you, and I feel it feels quite close. And so if whatever article I would be writing tomorrow or the following days based on our conversation is eventually published and gives me the impression from people's feedback and comments that I have actually come closer to achieving that goal, then there you go, realized value has been created through our conversation. So I'm only mentioning a few of those of the cycles that are part of that evaluation grid, but I do believe that they are quite, it's quite a fine fine-grained and sophisticated model to consider how the different spaces that we are part of are, as we try to make a difference in the world, right, and we bring our curiosity and pay attention to feedback, how this might actually be creating change in our lives or in the world more widely. So I would really encourage anyone to who is interested in this to check out this book I mentioned called Learning to Make a Difference, which was published in 2020. And there's also a kind of community guidebook that was released, I think 1 or 2 years later, so very recently, which can be downloaded as a free ebook from their website, wengertrainer.com. And I think is quite a beautiful summary of the whole theory in a very accessible way, and also presents that evaluation model so that people who feel interested in it can actually learn more about it and introduce it to their fellow learning space participants to carry out this kind of collective sense making and reckoning of what is happening for us, and why is this important, or perhaps what might be some areas of value creation which could be missing, that could enrich our collaboration and our collective endeavor. So it can help to shine a light on certain areas in ways that are useful. One thing I will mention that I came to realize at the end of my research is that it's so one of the really interesting characteristics of that grid or that approach is that it is value agnostic, as they say in the book. So it's not like there's a universal measure saying, okay, only that kind of value is true value, right? So sometimes they take, kind of funny or edgy examples in the book saying, right, you might have a social learning space of, drug dealers discussing, how to better sell drugs, and escape from the police or whatever, and perhaps they draw a lot of value from learning how to do this and, how to, whatever, do things which other people might consider not so nice to do. But that's fine. So just, for example, if you take a decolonial perspective on learning, and particularly a perspective that would be about deconstructing particular cultural and civilizational patterns that are part of us, then that would be a kind of a normative perspective, whereby, for example, a social learning space that would only enable one to stay comfortable in one's established system of norms, for example, that would be considered, for example, positive immediate value in the Wenger trainer model, for example, right? Because it doesn't establish a particular direction in which you should be learning in order to create value for yourself or for people more widely. So I just wanted to mention this. It's a really, really useful evaluation methodology and theory, which I find really amazing. And as any tool or any methodology, it cannot be used for just anything. So particularly for a more critical approach to learning and unlearning, there may be some other methods that are more appropriate.
Yeah, thank you for giving us that overview. And in your research there's a third piece that you add, I think it's storytelling. So that's a bit like how I understand that you reflect on value, and then so from the different stories you make the link with what are those value, let's say learning cycles, etc. So yeah, this, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything to storytelling, but yeah, that's what I felt was like the third piece of where your thesis is based on.
There's one part of the thesis which is more my own storytelling based on my journaling, which is where I kind of edge into the more critical decolonial space and reflect on previous chapters in the thesis and say, well, actually, now I'm in a different kind of perspective than the previous things, because it really came as a result of the social learning that went on for me in the thesis. The stories, the value creation stories that are present in the thesis, that were co-created with I believe of nearly 20 people within the Deep Adaptation Forum community, are actually part of that methodology put forth by the Wenger trainers. So it's an integral part of the evaluation methodology. Is in fact, you, on the one hand, you try to collect what they call effect data. So it's qualitative and quantitative indicators that can show that value is being created in some of the different cycles that we mentioned. I'm laughing because I'm getting really geeky now, really technical. I don't know how many people this speaks to, but and then the other half is much more kind of yeah, is much more accessible, because it's about asking people to tell a story about how they learned in or what they learned in a specific learning space, and then you kind of connect the two to create a picture of what has been going on. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. Now that's what I think. I mean, let's say you kept saying the word evaluation, and I'm wondering, like, for me, maybe because some people like, oh, evaluation, like most people don't like that, but I think for me it's a reflection tool.
Yeah.
In a way, it's a very nuanced reflection tool. And then let's say in your case it was about decolonizing. So okay, what is it that we are actually learning with and around that topic? And I'm wondering, for us, for example, in Greater Than, I think that let's say the framework or the guiding host that we use is power over versus power with, and learn power with. So then let's say if we wanted to go into a much more nuanced learning over again, how are we doing with that? Like, what value are we creating? And we all have a sense or an idea of it, but my learning, that's why I think that bringing practice and research together is so extremely valuable, because we might come up with things that we didn't think about, and that there's a lot of value there, and we didn't see it because we were just not aware, or we took it for granted. It's implicit. I don't know, like a lot of different things. And like this, you can, well, be aware of what's there and then work with it. So that's why I think it's so extremely valuable to think about, okay, so this is a methodology that can actually be used. And I'm going to put the links in the podcast, and they are super open, the two authors that you mentioned, with all of their content, so it's accessible for everyone. And then I just want to finish with let's say one sentence that's from Alex Pasaitis, from a paper he wrote around organizing and value. And I think that sometimes in networks we don't think enough about this dimension, like what is value for us. And actually we're building an alternative system, and that's why it's so important to think about what is value here, because it's not the value that is out there in the dominant system. So we need to first be very aware of it. And then a sentence I love, he writes, is it says, how we organize makes our interpretations on what value is tangible. So it's that first we need to know, okay, what is value for us? And then like, how do we organize around it? What do we want to foster? What we want more of? And that, I think that the methodology that that you used and the case in which you used it, it's like an example on how that can be done in a very beautiful way.
Thanks. Yeah, I love this this quotation. Yeah, it's really how you then you embody the value
Exactly
that you want to see created, right? So this this sense of or even how you embody the perhaps even the society or the world that you want to see realized, right? So you through the way in which you allow yourself to create value in a particular organization or network, you're prefiguring prefigurating what you want to see happen on a much wider scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, sadly we'll have to leave it here, but yeah, I'm happy that at least we got to share some of the glimpses of your research. And for the rest, anyone that is curious, there's this website that is very accessible and done with chapters, so it's like you don't have to go full on with the whole thesis, but you can take it step by step and go to the pieces that interest you. Yeah, please.
And also I just want to mention that there are summaries of the key chapters. So yeah, it's also possible to just read, for example, a summary of the chapter on the D&D circle. It's, I mean, yeah, some people have been reminding me that even the summaries that I wrote are pretty long, but at least they're shorter than the actual chapters. So
yeah,
it's well.
Yeah, no, it's always an effort to make a summary out of that. So thank you. For it. And thank you for sharing also your knowledge and experience with us, Dorian. It's super valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alicía. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge. It's I feel really enriched.
Thank you.
So this is what I am talking about. So first of all, shout out to Dorian for creating a website in which his thesis is completely accessible and broken down into small bits and pieces that makes it more digestible. The little bit that I wanted to show you was, or what I'm talking about in the chat I'm having with him, is the value creation cycle that you see on the left column. So I'm just going to describe it for those of you listening it on audio. And there is the value creation cycle that is immediate value that you get. And there is a question, a guiding question for it, which is, what is the experience like? And then we get to some of the dimensions, and there's another column that talks about the dimensions of this value, immediate value creation, about the experience. It's about the identification, the sense of inclusion, the mutual recognition as learning partners, conviviality and enjoyment, productive discomfort, contestability, etc. Then there is, for example, another value creation cycle. So the next one, first we have immediate, then we have potential. Question is, what comes out of it? Some elements: innovation, critique, skills, self-worth, social capital. Another cycle of value, so applied value. What are we learning into doing? Inventiveness, increasing one's influence, resisting more effectively, harnessing synergy, etc. So I think that this is so interesting how the value elements are broken down into sub-elements as the guiding question, and then these dimensions of value. And then I wanted to show you, let me go to the stories. Here we go. And then, no, wrong, Alicía, you chose the wrong one. 1 second, let's see. Okay, so now I have it. So the value creation stories. So the stories we talk about, I think in a moment, or a bit later on in the conversation. So each person, there's the social learning space, because there are several, the learning cycle that I was mentioning before. So for example, enabling or immediate that we have checked before. So we have to the immediate, and then there is the part of the story of this person that they worked on. So I think that it's such a deep analysis of the value creation stories in a community. And I don't know, now I have so many more questions. Like I would like to really ask him, what is it, what does it do with the collective community network when someone works on this and the value creation elements become so much clearer and concrete and specific. So yeah, just so much more curious even. I just wanted to show you briefly. Go and check the website. It's just so insightful. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you left with many questions. For me, I really have this burning question now, checking the podcast also again after so many months. Just so curious what it would be like if we applied this methodology. For us, it's greater than having a look at, for example, dimension that is relevant to me, or I think that we do quite a bit of, but we could do differently and a lot more of power with. How do we work with it? How is it showing up? What is the value creation around that? So yeah, I live with this big curiosity, and again, seeing the value of applying methodologies, frameworks to collectives, networks, communities to increase our learning and therefore also our resilience. See you in the next episode.